2,000 years ago, dusty trade routes connected China to Rome. Silk, spices, and ideas traveled thousands of miles along paths that shaped the entire ancient world. That network had a name. You already know it. Now, China is building it again. Bigger, faster, more expensive than anything humanity has ever attempted. Over 140 countries, $1 trillion, and counting. But why would any country spend $1 trillion building infrastructure in other people's countries? The answer is not generosity. It is not just trade either. It is something far more fundamental than both. To understand Belt and Road, you need to find one specific spot on the map. The narrow strip of water between Malaysia and Indonesia. The Strait of Malacca. This is where China's greatest strategic nightmare lives. Approximately 80% of China's oil imports pass through this single choke point every single day. At its narrowest point, the strait is just 2.8 kilometers wide. Narrower than Manhattan is long. Any naval power controlling Malacca can effectively switch off China's economy. No oil means no factories. No factories means no exports. No exports means no everything. Chinese strategists call this the Malacca Dilemma. And Belt and Road is, at its core, China's attempt to build alternative routes that nobody can simply switch off. Building those alternative routes means building infrastructure across dozens of countries that desperately need investment, which is how a Chinese strategic necessity became a global development program almost by accident. The Belt and Road Initiative has three main components. Think of them as three separate strategies, each solving a different part of the same problem. First, the land bridge. China is running freight trains from cities like Chengdu and Yiwu all the way to Duisburg in Germany and London in the UK. Across deserts, mountain ranges, and multiple national borders. A journey that once took over 30 days by sea now takes roughly 12 days by rail. The number of annual freight trips has grown from a handful in 2013 to over 15,000 today. Second, the Maritime Road. China has been financing, building, or acquiring port facilities in strategically critical locations around the Indian Ocean. Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Kenya, Djibouti. Analysts call this the String of Pearls, a chain of port facilities giving China a maritime presence across the entire Indian Ocean. Each port is presented as a commercial investment. Each port also sits on a critical shipping lane. Presumably, coincidence. Third, the Digital Silk Road, the component that gets the least attention and arguably matters the most. China has been laying undersea fiber optic cables and building 5G networks across Africa, Southeast Asia, and parts of Europe. Whoever builds your digital infrastructure tends to have significant influence over how it operates. That is not a conspiracy theory. It is simply how technology works. And it is why the Digital Silk Road has become one of the most contested dimensions of the entire US-China rivalry. Now for the part where reasonable people genuinely disagree. Is China offering developing nations a lifeline or a trap? The argument in favor is straightforward. Developing nations have enormous infrastructure needs that Western institutions have historically underfunded. China offers financing without lengthy conditionality requirements. For many governments, that is genuinely attractive. The argument against centers on what happens when those loans cannot be repaid. And the most cited case is a small island in the Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka, and a port called Hambantota. Sri Lanka borrowed heavily from Chinese state banks to build Hambantota Port. The port significantly underperformed commercially. Debt obligations kept growing. Options kept shrinking. By 2017, unable to service its debt, Sri Lanka signed a 99-year lease handing operational control of the port to a Chinese state company. 99 years for a port, on a strategically critical Indian Ocean island. China's position is that this was a normal commercial arrangement. Critics argue the outcome is functionally indistinguishable from a strategic acquisition. The debate continues. Sri Lanka's economic difficulties, however, are not debated. Hambantota is not isolated. Zambia, Pakistan, Kenya, and several other BRI nations have faced serious debt servicing challenges tied to Chinese loans. The pattern is real. Whether it reflects deliberate strategy or optimistic lending gone wrong remains genuinely contested. The Western response to Belt and Road was slow. For nearly a decade, the US and EU watched China build ports and railways across the developing world without mounting a coherent alternative. Then, around 2021, the counter-strategy began taking shape. The G7 launched the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, PGII, pledging $600 billion in coordinated financing by 2027. The EU launched its Global Gateway Initiative worth 300 billion euros. Both were explicitly designed as alternatives to Belt and Road. Both were announced with considerable fanfare. Both are still largely works in progress. India, meanwhile, has been one of the most vocal critics. New Delhi views Chinese port development in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh as strategic encirclement. India calls it the string of pearls. India is not pleased about wearing it. The result is something historians will call the New Great Game, a competition for infrastructure influence across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, fought not with armies, but with construction contracts, loan agreements, and port leases. So, what is the Belt and Road Initiative ultimately? It is China's answer to the Malacca Dilemma, the largest infrastructure program in human history. A genuine development effort in countries the West, largely ignored, and a source of serious debt stress for several recipient nations. It is all of those things simultaneously, which is why it is so easy for both defenders and critics to cherry-pick the evidence that supports their preferred conclusion. What is clear is this: the world is being rewired. Trade routes, digital networks, and diplomatic relationships are being restructured at a scale not seen since the post-World War II order was built. China may be building a new world order, or it may be building an overextended network of underperforming assets and resentful debtor nations. Possibly both. The trillion-dollar gamble is still in progress. The ancient Silk Road shaped civilization for centuries. Whether this new version does the same depends on decisions being made right now, in Beijing, in Washington, in Brussels, and in dozens of developing capitals quietly choosing which road to take. Because here is the thing about roads: they always lead somewhere. The question is who built them, who controls them, and who benefits most when the traffic starts flowing. The stakes could not be higher. The next decade will determine whether the Belt and Road Initiative becomes the foundation of a new global order, or a cautionary tale about the limits of ambition without accountability. If this made you think differently about global infrastructure, trade routes, or how power actually moves in the 21st century, subscribe to GeoMind Studio, because the next chapter of this story is already being written, and you will want to know how it ends.